Okay, good to see you, Andy.
Likewise, my friend.
The Salayatana is actually a very curious thing. Um, the word comes from uh, within the teachings of the teacher Samapada, and is basically about in the halfway point.
Mm.
And
Yes.
okay, now basically, what we can say is that we, as human beings, commonly use the word consciousness in two distinct, different ways.
Hmm.
All right, and that they are both within the teaching of the teacher Samapada, but one comes after the other. Okay, that in fact the Salayatana, the Atana, is the senses.
Mm.
And so consciousness of the senses means that we're actually hearing with the ears, seeing with the eyes. Okay, this is our way of, let us say, communicating and establishing for ourselves reality is through the
Yeah.
senses.
Yeah.
Okay, there are five of them, with a sixth one as the mind. But the whole point is that when it becomes the mind, that's when it's a different kind of consciousness.
Mm.
All right. So the example in English would be, "I see a tree," is different than "I see what you mean," because one of them
Okay.
is
Sure. Sure.
processed.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of them is processed and the other one is merely input. Now, here's the point, that even to say "I see a tree" has to have a little bit of processing in it.
Of course. Yeah. So, in other words, you have subject object, but there's also a tangible immediacy to it, whereas the other one is basically just the mind.
Right. And is possibly a mind moment or two in lagging behind.
Hmm.
Okay. Because of the processing time, which
Mm.
is called perception,
Yeah.
which in the Pali is also called sanya,
Hmm.
and it's also called Namarupa.
Hmm.
Okay. And so what happens is that we receive input from the external world
Mm.
through our senses.
Hmm.
And when we do, when the eye contacts that object, consciousness of the eye arises.
Hmm.
Now, eye consciousness is not the same as ear consciousness.
Yes.
All right. So eye consciousness arises, and then to understand what it is that we see, we go through a process called perception, which is basically, very quickly, the mind is going through a barrel of old photos to try
Yes.
to match something up, to see if we can say, I know what that is because I have seen it before. I
Yes.
recognize it. That recognition or recognizement is the Salayatana. All right. It's the
So,
movie that we play on the inside of our mind.
and if the movie is too dominant over your perceptive input, then the trigger that you get from, say, the visual input here will be overlaid by what you've seen before, by the conditioned factors that you've had through seeing that object before, will be more of a repetition of the same rather than the real
Right.
input.
So a better way of saying it, rather than "it is overlaid," rather the old stuff overlays the new image.
Yeah.
That the old stuff often has more power. That's
Mm.
not always the case.
Mm.
That in fact, if we have a present situation that does overpower the past, it can actually kind of help erase it. This is what would people call a deep insight.
Mm.
Is something really big happens right now that
Mm.
really kind of really impacts the old stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
but as you can easily understand, when we were children, we were highly impressionable. And what did that mean? Little things struck deep in the
Mm.
mind of the ignorant child. Okay. So we either have to do it two ways. One is to keep pounding it over and over and over and over again to get down to that, or the other one is to make the new insight so deep
Mm.
that it penetrates down to the same level that the old insights that were, let us say, haywire.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So that's the whole point then of the Salayatana is very, very highly connected to the processing and the old data that's used to process. Now, that old data is what is called Sankara,
Mm.
the old pile of junk, our
Mm.
library, uncatalogued library. Okay, and that the practice then is that we are now going to intentionally and consciously add new library books,
Yeah.
wholesome data, pile it on top of the old stuff, and only this time through our wisdom and our knowledge of the Dhamma, we're going to start cataloging it and putting in order so that it can be easily found and referenced.
Mm.
That we're not going to, in fact, ever be able to get rid of the old data, but we can certainly find a new way to process data so that we were better off getting new, wholesome data rather than the old, unwholesome data.
So in effect, Salayatana, in the way you're explaining, is a way of re-referencing with a sense of wholesomeness, rather than keep on tripping over the reactions of this past data, which is
Right.
owning me.
hmm So basically, then what we're saying is that the practice of meditation is actually working at a fairly deep level of how the mind works because we keep putting wholesome thoughts in, which then get stored in a wholesome way into the
Mm.
Salayatana so that they are then the wholesome new information that's used to make sense of reality. Okay. And
Which I guess then means that returning back again and again and again becomes easier and easier.
well, yes, it does as we're developing the skill of right noble effort.
Mm.
And right noble effort has two qualities to it.
Mm.
One is the quality of the itself, just the effort that it takes. And that's got several attributes. And then it's got another quality, and that is our attitude. That as we develop the attitude that our efforts are going to be successful,
Mm.
then the efforts become easier. Now,
Mm.
here's an example of that is that mom walks into the kitchen to see that the garbage hasn't been taken out, and it's the family's, let us say, rule that the teenage boy takes the garbage out. So mom calls her son, come take out the garbage. Okay, and so he does come in, he picks it up, and he carries it out.
Mm.
Okay, story number two, he walks into the kitchen all by himself and sees that there's a load of garbage there, and he
Mm.
gets the idea, this is my job, and he picks it up and carries it out to the street.
Mm.
Now, in that regard, which is easier? Which is the one that takes the less actual effort? The
Mm.
one that it done because he was told to do it, or the one that he did because he decided to do it on his own?
Most definitely the second one, and also there's more energy with that second one as well. There's a vitality within it.
Yes, it does. That's the whole point that we need to then start coming out of doing what we're told to do in our own mind and following our own rules and start making some fresh choices in our life.
Mm.
Because that's where the attitude changes and that's where also the effort is not so effortful. It becomes easier now. This is why in the seven factors of enlightenment, the Sambhojana, where the Eightfold Noble Path is re-referenced,
Mm.
not from the in the first way of looking at it, it's the skills to be developed, and the Sambhojana is from the reference of these are already fully developed. These are now awakening factors. These are the enlightenment factors, and they are
Kindergarten, university.
precisely, or maybe didactic versus lab.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
classroom versus lab.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah,
That
nice.
you learn how to be a therapist by classroom? Oh no, you've got to go into those group therapy sessions.
Yeah.
That's the lab, okay? You got to do it. Carpentry, you don't learn out of a book.
Mm,
You got to go do it,
mm,
okay? And
mm,
so this is where the idea then of unremitting energy comes from in the seven factors of enlightenment is
mm,
because of two things. One, we have intentionally developed it as a skill, so now we're really strong mentally.
mm,
And then the other one is that we have the attitude, because in the beginning we all start off as victims, and we got to really put in a lot of work to get it done. And
mm.
now we've changed our attitude of I'm a winner of this. I am an anapanasati dude, buddy. And with that, and with that attitude, then it becomes easy.
Yes, 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 yes. And so with the effort, there's, like you said, didactically, there'll be a dualistic split, me doing this
Hmm.
and me having a bit of a pressure upon me having to do this. Whereas with the more energetic form, there is a sharing.
Hmm.
There's a wish to do it because it helps others, but I'm not doing it to get a reward. I'm doing it because this is part of the insight that I have.
Right. This because I can see for myself that this is a better way of doing it.
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
So, how do we see that? Is by actually doing it. And so we actually have to take the effort. So I will put one more example in, and that is the example of in the park when Daddy is pushing his daughter on the swing. The first few pushes is a lot of work, but after that he can get her going and she can swing quite well, and all he has to do is when she comes back up in his face is just to give another push.
mm,
But we have to keep pushing, and then it's easy. If
mm,
we stop pushing, then the swing is going to go back to its defaulted grounded position, and
mm,
so will the mind. Okay, and so once we get to Anapanasati on a roll, we have to keep going and keep pushing, and that means that we're swinging, Betty. But
mm.
if we stop pushing, then the mental swing will stop, and we'll go back to the default, back into the dukkha again. Okay, so now go ahead.
So technique transitions to non-technique simply through the insight of the Dharma.
Hmm.
Dharma, Dharma being no longer a Dharma investigation, a Dharma now being something that's felt sense. The energy that you say, there's a felt sense of the energy being part of the action that you're taking.
Yes, that's where we begin to integrate it. Okay, and so this is why it's referred to as energy,
Mm,
but that really the big change is the change in attitude.
mm,
Okay, now this attitude is addressed in the usage of the word of shraddha or
Shraddha, yeah.
sada, which
Mhm.
is actually badly translated as faith.
Faith, yeah.
This is not faith.
Confidence,
This is
oozing.
confidence based upon experience. Okay, this is actually repeated winning,
Yes.
repeatedly getting the job done.
No longer being a victim of circumstance. Now there's an intimacy with responsibility.
Exactly, that
Responsibility
we
being mine.
that when in fact what this whole practice is to take control of your life rather than letting it be on automatic pilot running into a pile of birds or a storm or a mountain or whatever from time to time. We're actually going to start piloting our own ship
Mm. Yeah.
and watch where we're going. And
Yeah.
in the beginning, taking it off of automatic pilot and start steering it ourselves is a lot of work because it's new. But once we get back into being that pilot, that captain, now the captainship is really easy
Mm.
because we've got the experience of piloting our own craft rather than leaving it on the automatic pilot of instinct.
Now the Brahmins really wouldn't have liked this, would they? Back in the day, they would have been up
No,
in arms.
they actually, for centuries, tried to destroy this teaching.
Mm.
They eventually did.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Why? Because they can't make any money off of this. They can't get you to come to them when you're dead and say, "Here's all my land. Please crack my skull with your ceremony."
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that's maybe a hidden part of the whole history. Hey, I don't know if that so many people realize that.
But that's the history of all religions.
Mm.
That, in fact, that's the history of every organization. Why? Well, organizations are, there's two kinds. There's a noble kind of organization that's rare, and then there's the ordinary kind of organization. Now, an organization that is noble means that when the person joins it, they are either trained in the noble or they bring nobility with them to it and add that to the nobility. To an ordinary organization, when somebody joins it, they bring themselves to it. And when they bring themselves to it, that means that now they can't distinguish between the organization and their self. So when the organization goes up, they go up, and when the organization goes down, they go down, and they add their own self-preservation instinct to
Yes.
that organization, which gets down to the bottom line of that organizations start off with a mission and wind up with the mission of self-preservation.
Of course. Of course.
And the Democratic, the Republican Party, many factions of Christianity, their only point in life is to stay alive, cults especially.
Yeah.
Just or if you can't, go out with a bang.
Yeah. Whether it's moralistic or amoralistic.
Yes, exactly. And so the organization then becomes part of the ego.
Mm.
And so this is why the Buddha recommends that we don't identify with things. This is called the thicket of views. I am a this and I'm a that, and I belong to this club and that club and all of this kind of stuff. Where in fact the only kind of organization to really belong to is one that's noble. One where the me, is not important anymore, but the organization and the friendship is.
Sangha.
Sangha.
Real Sangha.
So back to the point about the right effort then is that if we, because a lot of students do this. I mean, I've just talked about what we do is that we get on a roll, we get on a high, we say, "Oh, I've got this meditation thing geared, we got it wired," and then we stop practicing. And then we fall flat on our face a few weeks later in a tragic situation we set up for ourselves and wonder what happened. And the answer is never mind, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start over again.
Yeah.
You got to put the effort back into it to get that swing going again.
And then the energy is like a dynamo that it doesn't really have an off switch. There's a dynamo that you've accessed. And I guess that's where the switch is to pity, well, joy, but a real joy, a joy that's based on something which is Dharma fed rather than organization fed.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly correct. And that we have to make that change of reference along the way, which in a way is that change of reference of attitude. Rather than I need the organization, it's just that I don't need anything.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
And isn't it marvelous to be around a whole bunch of guys that are just like that?
Yes. No, the conversations and energy that you get from that or that you share with that is just so much more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Hence
And
this.
so we help each other in the Dhamma. That's you've probably heard the expression Kaliya Metta.
Kaliya Metta.
Kaliya Metta.
No.
It actually, the definition is spiritual friend.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Okay. Well, that's a whole lot better concept than Guru Sila. Okay, that you don't want to put your spiritual friend too high up on the shelf. You make him unreachable.
Mm.
Okay, and so we want to approach the Dhamma and share the Dhamma as if it's right here and immediately available, not way off out there on top of some mountain like I am, the
Yeah.
guru.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and so the spiritual friend is the thing that needs to be promoted.
Mm. Instead of putting the figure of even in this case the Buddha as something so high that you have to constantly scrape and bow to even put the image there, you regard the Sangha as the sanctity or the place that is really cherished because it supports you as well.
Hmm. Well, then we have to start mentioning the fact that in the West, that's where the money comes in, is in that separation. Rather than the friend, the spiritual friend, we have it set up as doctor and patient or therapist and client or religious freak and religious nut.
Yeah,
Those.
totally. Yeah.
uh, and that it always has to do with a payback or a retribution model,
Mm.
and that the Buddha's model is the model of paying it forward.
Hmm.
That we take care of each other
Yeah.
because I was taken care of.
Mm.
That in fact that's the way that we do it with our children. That a child couldn't possibly completely repay his parents,
Mm.
but he does have the obligation to give that same upbringing to his own kids.
Mm.
Okay, that we're obligated then to raise our children to the highest standard that we can because that's where our parents were,
Mm.
even though they weren't up to the level that we would have liked for them to have been, they were up at the level where they could have been. And that's
Yeah.
our job also, okay, to pay it forward. So we see that in our general society, but
Mm.
we also see it especially in the Sangha. That's why it's been able to stay alive for 2,500 years, because
Yeah.
it's always being paid forward rather than being paid back.
You actually exemplify this really well, Dhammarato. I don't mean to sort of pump you up at all, but yeah, you living a simple life and just doing all these things for free. I really admire that, and I really applaud it as well, my friend.
Okay. Well, that means now that as I see that I have an enormous obligation to the Dhamma,
Mm.
that I enjoy it. That's one of the benefits of
Mm.
doing my duty is that I get the benefit of that. And if I
Yeah,
don't do my duty to the Dhamma, then I don't get that benefit.
sure.
But actually, I'm doing this at the request of Achan Po.
Yes, yeah, I heard that.
Except that I would imagine that anybody that Achan Po runs across, he's going to ask them to teach the Dhamma.
Do you really think that's the case?
Well, I really took him up on it. Actually, I basically yes. Any young Western monk that comes close to Achan Po is going to get put to work,
Mm.
and a lot of them can't stand it.
Mm.
Okay, um, but that's the way. I mean, he was a master.
Yeah. When was the last time you saw him?
I don't remember, a couple of years ago.
Okay.
I don't travel much anymore.
Yeah, I heard. Yeah, you just hang out on the island. That's good. So with the piti in the Sambojjhanga, the transition from um, piti to sukha, there isn't so much of a transition. There's more of a letting go, or there's more of a watching the joy pass.
Actually, in the Sambojano, the way that it's explained is just one word, and that one word is often used in other places in the suttas, and that one word is pitisuka.
Hmm.
It's a one word thing
Yeah,
that
yeah.
we break it down only in one place in the Anapanasati Sutta to make the point that both of these aspects have to be developed together. But once they're together, they go back together. Okay, and that's a very very natural thing to happen. That when something happens, we go way up in our delight, and then it lingers and trails off for a while, and then it comes back down. Okay,
Mm.
and that lingering quality then is the sukha. But we had to develop the sukha in order to get the piti when we were training in the first place.
Mm.
Okay, and we can use the English language words in order to show what that means, is because sukha has the quality of safety, security, comfortable, and satisfaction, to
Mhm.
where piti has the quality of celebration, of success. Okay, and so when it
That's
happens,
so
we go.
interesting.
Go ahead.
You've really switched something on in my reflection back upon some of the practices I've done recently. In that, mostly, for example, the cicadas are really out in tune at the moment here in Queensland. So they're really vibrating, and I always feel that as a sense of um, sukha, sukha in the insight of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. But then there is some sort of a celebration that comes from that. There's a celebration which kind of like overshadows it a little bit. It
Mhm.
overshadows the insight, and it's almost like let's have some party around this. It's not a party of wanting others to come and join, but there's a sense of I've accomplished something here. There's something that I've actually achieved, and then that seems to pass, almost like the cicadas have stopped now. The
Okay.
cicadas suddenly stop in a still point, and then there's that what you said just now, the security, the safety, and the what else did you say? The satisfaction. There's a real
Satisfaction.
satisfaction,
Hmm.
which seems to be like a quantum leap for some reason. Now it's very
Right.
subtle.
Out of dissatisfaction,
Yes,
out of the dukkha.
out of the
That's the
unwholesome. Yeah.
quantum. That's right. Out of the unwholesome into the wholesome. Exactly so. So, um, here's an example of what we're talking about. Is that setting up the situation to where the meditator himself has the thought of the realization, I can do this. I can feel satisfied. I can
Yes.
feel safe and secure. And that
Mm.
the emphasis upon the can has to do with the training, and that I can do this is then turned into the pity, which
Mm.
is the realization of the winning. Yes, I can do this.
Mm.
That in fact, in one of the sutras, number 48, the Kosambian Sutta, the Buddha talks about that when the student knows that no matter how obstructed the mind becomes, he can clean it out and come back to this present moment to see
Mm.
things the way that they really are. This is the first step of the noble path. This is the path. This
Mm.
is noble. This is supramundane.
Mm.
This is not held by ordinary people. Now, in fact, I've just quoted you one little paragraph, one verse out of the Kosambian Sutta, that no matter how obstructed the mind gets, this guy has the first knowledge to know that he can come out of that and come back into this present moment.
Mm.
What a celebration that
Yeah.
is. Okay, to know that you can come out of your crap, to know that you can come back into this present moment, even if you're on the ground being beaten by the police, you can come back out of that state
Mm.
and cooperate with them rather than rebelling from them.
So much. And the insight from that, apart from the insight that you just mentioned, is that the the sense of the Patichit Samappada is tangible. There's a tangibility to it. It's no longer so that Salayatana and the Basa and the Namarupa no longer just a theory-based thing. It's a felt sense thing, like the cicadas stopping at just the right moment. and continuing at just the right moment. So an arising and a passing, and a rising and a passing.
Hmm. That's because not only are they singing, but they're listening too.
Yeah, right. You can feel them here. So, like, are they loud there at the moment?
No, they're not here at this moment. There's birds and there's wind, but there's
I can
no.
hear them. Mm.
Uh, so the effort then is the effort that it takes to change the way that we process data.
Mm.
We actually have to change so that we can come up with a wholesome salayatana to let that impact us.
Mm.
Okay. That in the series of Namarupa Salayatana, the next one is Pasa,
Yeah.
which means that what we are contacted with is our own imagination, not originality, not the
Mm.
original thing. What impacts us is what we've made out of it. And the way that we're impacted then creates our feelings, which is then the drivers that wind up being vocalized and into the action of wanting and grasping and clinging, etc., like this. Okay, so what we're really saying is that we are changing what we say. We're changing the thoughts at the level of the salayatana
Mm.
in order for that to begin to impact us so that we can feel the way that we're talking to ourselves rather than feeling the way that we were before we started talking to ourselves in a wholesome way.
Yeah.
That wholesome stuff actually starts at the salayatana, but it takes work
Mm.
because it is so used to coming up with a bunch of
Yeah.
no-nos and a bunch of crap and all of that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. And so we have to keep coming back and putting a positive spin on it. So even though you're up on your own crucifix, you can still sing Brian's song, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life.
Life of Brian.
Yeah, the life of Brian.
Yeah.
That, in fact, on the joke on the Sangha group just a while ago, they were talking about monks simulating themselves. And I says, I want to go out like Brian. Strap
Mm.
me up.
Yeah. Yeah. Rather than actually just reveling in all the dukkha based upon, just me achieving something in the future, being with the salayatana and noticing the arising and passing in the moments like the cicada. I guess that's the same as like you're saying in the life of Brian. He's there celebrating.
Yeah, celebrate what you've got.
Mm.
Celebrate what you do have.
Mm.
And that celebration comes from the fact of that true knowledge that you know that you have some control over your own mind.
Mm.
That is the liberating part. That's why it's noble. That's why this is the first step to nobility.
Mm.
Is that you recognize that you're the one who is in charge here. This is, in fact, you've heard about the three fetters, the three lower fetters.
Yes.
This is the destruction of the personality view. Because why? Because the personality view was that loser that we had developed, that
Mm-hmm.
victim, and now we're changing that personality into that of a winner. And in the process, we're recognizing that the personality is a moving target.
Yes.
It's not fixed. I am not what I thought I was.
Yeah.
That was just a thought.
And there needs to be no rites and rituals based around um, a technique or some sort of way of getting somewhere because it's already here. And the
Mhm.
doubt can let go because of that. And then there's no personality view left in what you're left with. There's just an arising and passing again,
Right.
a vibration.
And whatever you want to feel. You can take the you out of it and say whatever there is. I mean, the what's left is the choice,
The choice. Yeah.
not the you, but the choice.
That was a sudden insight. Wow. It's the choice. You choice you get with that.
Right, that's
Yeah.
what's left is the choice, not the you, because the you was the one that had no choice.
Yes.
That's why it needs to be preserved. That's the self-preservation mechanism, is to preserve that self. And now that we recognize that that self is a moving target, and the only thing that's really left is choice.
Yeah.
And we do
So many
that.
psychologists are talking about choice in this way of having a template, a rite or a ritual, whereas this is all based around the maturity of realizing that actually the choice is there when you can feel the insight of celebrate, well, not celebration of the arising and passing.
Mhm.
There's no fixed, firm, solid object other than the imagination of the mind. The mind keep on recreating it.
That's where I come in with the phrase, just enjoy the show. Let's get into our senses and watch the show.
Yeah.
The reality, the paradise that we're in is a show. Now, to follow along with that, you probably heard about Shakespeare's point about all the world's a stage and each one of us is an actor upon that
Mm.
stage, right? Okay. To carry it a little further, not only are we actors upon the stage, but we've got a script that we're reading.
Yeah.
Where did we get that script? We got it from our parents. And what's the name of that script? Me.
Yeah.
Okay. And here we are reading the script called Me on the stage where everybody else is on stage reading their own script. It's quite a quite a show. And the thing to do,
All men live lives of quiet desperation,
desperation.
and this is the thing that we just don't tend to see. And yet, when we do see it, there is a celebratory quality to it.
hmm To wake up and recognize you don't have to read that script.
Mm.
That in fact you don't even have to stand there to watch the show. You can go sit in the audience because the audience is pretty empty. Everybody's on stage that should be in the audience. And so we could just lay back and just enjoy the show. Sit in the audience. You don't have to join the show.
And people in the West, when they tend to go on to the retreats more and more, they will put in the effort, which is the first part that you were talking about, the effort in the Eightfold Noble Path. There is an effort, but it's not necessarily right effort because the strain has
Oh, they work
go.
way too hard. Yes.
Whereas the retreats that I've done in India and in Burma, they're so much more relaxed. There's like a relaxedness, which is
They're still
easy.
way up too tight.
Oh, are they? Okay.
That in Thailand, let us say, with all the tens of thousands of watts and hundreds of thousands of monks, there's only a couple of three places that have retreats.
Mm.
Okay.
Mm.
But in fact, a lot of them are established around Wat Suan Mok. And I got to tell you, that's my fault because I
Mm.
was with Achan Po, was the one who got the retreat started fresh out of Goenka school. But retreats didn't even exist before the 1950s. That's a Burmese government construction.
Mm.
That the Buddha didn't say go to that retreat over there, the one with the B&B and the $3,000 meal ticket. He didn't say that. He said go to the forest, go to the foot of a tree,
Mm.
go to a private place.
Mm.
Okay, but you can see that in fact the retreats were kind of set up with the idea of the first grade. The first grade teacher would have a whole lot of work to
Sure.
do if all of the 40 students in her class she had to give everything individually to. Except that that's the right way to do it. That's the way that I was trained at Wat Suan Mok.
Yeah.
Though I led retreats, I mean, Achan Po, um, he did his thing with me privately, kind of,
Sure.
often when I wasn't even watching. So, um,
But the retreats in the West, they can start to become a little bit too artificial in that there is uh, a sense of having obviously a script to run by as far as technique and to have an environment that is isolated from outside. But it will help to give you some sort of a stability to begin with, I guess.
well, It's got some disadvantages that could be worked with. The example is they talk about noble silence without describing exactly what it is.
Mm.
And that basically they talk about noble silence as strict silence, but really a noble silence would be a very friendly silence.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's one thing, and part of the reason why they don't want that to happen is because if a student has a big whoop-de-doo session or a meditation, if they go and tell that to other people,
Mm.
then what will happen is that first off, two things will happen. One is that they'll get jealous.
Yeah.
And number two is that when he remembers that incident in the future, he won't remember what actually happened. He'll remember a story about it instead.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next thing is that he wants that experience, so he gets jealous too.
Mm.
And so this is one of the reasons for having the silence. But the downside of that is that people go, they don't meet each other, they do the retreat, and then they leave the retreat, and they haven't made one friend.
Mm.
That one of the things that I would recommend any time that students are going to a retreat is go a few days early, make some
Mm.
friends,
Mm.
and then at the end of the retreat, make sure that in fact here on the island of Kopangan, uh, oftentimes the guys will get together and go off as a group to one particular bungalow and hang out. That's a really
Mm.
good thing to do rather than coming out of a retreat and going right back into the ordinary life. Hey, hang out with some Dhamma friends who were in that retreat with you. And
Yeah.
yet they don't talk about that because it's all about. Here's another issue about the retreats. People go to the retreat without being ready for them.
Mm.
They don't already have established a relationship with the teacher, that they meet the
Mm.
teacher and the teacher meets them in the retreat.
Mm.
And then they might see them once or twice through the retreat. And at the end of the retreat, the business deal is over. You paid your money, the retreat's finished, out you go, and you don't have a friendship with anyone left.
It's more like a commercial exchange, or it could
It's
become like
become
a commercial exchange.
it winds up for most people being like a commercial exchange,
Mm.
and then that leads the question of uh, uh, you get what you pay for,
Mm.
value received. You didn't do a good job at that retreat because I didn't get anything out of it,
Yeah.
kind of mentality, it's your
Yeah.
fault.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where
Sign of
in
the
the
times. But-
Kaliya Metta model, though, because of friendship, everybody recognizes that 100% of all the work that needs to be put in for each individual's transformation, they have to do that for themselves. You can't pay a fee and have the shrink you.
Mm. Yeah. You're right.
You can't pay for the meditation and have the meditation retreat do something for you.
Mm.
And yet that's the way that we think. I mean, that's uh, magical thinking, which is very common.
Yeah. Yeah. Big time. There was another, from a neurophysiologic point of view, it's something that I guess is quite close to the work that I do, is that I've noticed on the retreats don't that have complete silence, that over time the physiology has the potential to start to degrade some of the neural structures of the brain, i.e. the vagus nerve that travels from the brain to talk to the subdiaphragmatic organs can start to get a little bit out of balance in comparison to the vagus nerve, which is based around social engagement. And so not being able to socially engage for a period of time might whittle that away so much that you start to get anxiety responses.
Is
You might start.
actually artificial.
Hmm.
That's the part that makes it so interesting is that the noble science is a pretend seclusion.
Hmm.
Okay. That just because you're supposed to be quiet doesn't make those knees go away.
Yeah, sure.
Those little cute ones over in the corner.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That we pretend to be in seclusion and we're not.
Mm,
It's actually quite noisy in a
mm,
meditation hall.
mm, mm, mm.
as opposed
Whereas
to the woods.
if you're in a jungle, you're in a forest, and you were
Hmm.
to have lots of interactions with the wildlife, you were to not to dissuade them, but not to not to be in a conversation with them, but you'd have some sort of social engagement in a way to nature again. But as soon
In
as that's cut off,
communion,
yeah, communion.
but not in conversation.
Exactly. Whereas if you have a complete cutting off of all of that, and you only have your internal chatter or your internal sort of communication to keep that social engagement going, then certain parts of the brainstem will start to atrophy. They have to. It's inevitable. Whether that then forms anxiety or whether that's something you can actually start to become okay with is a totally different thing. So that chat or that interaction at the end of a course would be so incredibly valuable, because otherwise you go out into society and it'd be literally like wham.
It actually depends upon the way that the course is taught. It
Sure.
has to do, in fact, with the attitude of the teachers. The attitude of the teachers will greatly affect the student. So if
Mm.
the attitude of the teacher, like Goenko, you've got to work, then people do. And if they have the attitude of never mind, start again, because he's got that in also. If the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, start again. But that one is almost always overlaid with, but you got to work at it. You got to work, okay? And so that that quality then um, is put into various things like strong determination sittings
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff. To where at Watch Someone Moke, we've actually dwindled it down. We don't require people to sit more than 30 minutes. And even with that, they have full permission to get up and move around.
Mm.
They're not supposed to sit and stay there. They're supposed to make the body comfortable, which is hard enough to do
Mm.
anyway. Okay, so
Do you
make
do you
the body.
think if the actual live presence of um, a teacher or a guide or someone who is able to communicate on a fairly regular basis would uh, help the transition from that right effort to the energy that we talk about in the bojanga, the seven bojanga. So rather than it actually being something I have to keep on working on effortlessly, there's an energy, a dynamo that the communication, the communion with
Hmm.
the teacher, with the other people, every now and then would
All
start
right,
to spark up, not just meta.
here's something about that, and that is that I had a much more intimate relationship with Muktananda in India. When I was
Okay.
at his restaurant, he paid attention to me. But in fact, on several occasions, I noticed that I would turn around and he was staring right at me, waiting for me to recognize him.
Mm.
That's in fact exactly what Achan Po would do. I never got any of that kind of stuff from Goenka. It's like Goenka never learned how to be a guru.
Mm.
He never learned how to do any of that stuff and work with any of the students directly. That's why he never had anybody become uh, at the level that he could trust them to start teaching. To where Achan Po and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa pushed me into teaching, but they were there for me. They threw me off the cliff and then they caught me when I was about to crash land. You know, it was that kind of thing.
Right.
And that relationship is absolutely the foundation of the
Sure.
Sangha. You've got to really, really be able to trust someone before you're able to trust a whole lot of people.
Mm.
And sometimes it's tragic when the students lose trust for me because that's part of my job is to be there enough so that the students actually trust me
Mm.
so that we can talk about some of the really weird stuff that they don't want to talk about. I mean, it was his fault. I mean, that guy yelled at me rather than recognizing that it didn't matter what that guy did. What are you doing? That's
Mm.
the point. And so that's the waking up at the beginning of the Sangha is where each one of us recognize that we've got our own personal responsibility to clean up our own mind.
Mm-hmm.
And when we do, we also get the idea that we can do that because we see other people have been able to do that. And then we begin to see other students around who are able to do that. And now we begin to join and get into the Sangha. And that's what's missing in the West, but it
Sure.
is the foundation of every Wat in Thailand.
Yeah. I get that impression. Yeah.
That the relationship that the monks have with each other and the relationship they have with the abbot or their teacher is what makes Sangha the Sangha. And Wanka didn't, he, he had every opportunity to develop a lineage, and he didn't develop one. All we have left to Goenka is a set of meditation CDs.
So with the
Yeah.
Salayatana, if it is understood or embodied, there's a sense of non-duality, with the perceptions. So the seeing is only seeing, the hearing is only hearing. Then when jhana automatically becomes what it is, it's an accumulation of the factors. The factors come in, then the insight is there as well. So I know it's not a correct term, but it's now the samatha is also vipassana now. Yeah, you have this sense of insight as you're relaxed, very calm, very, very one with what is. Then paticca samuppada becomes much easier to understand. It's not such an elusive sort of topic.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fourth jhana, when one not strives to get to the fourth jhana, but it just happens, there's a fourth jhana state.
Well,
Not
that's
state.
the
There's
whole
a fourth.
point. You can't strive to be
No.
relaxed. You
Yeah.
got to relax in order to be
Yeah.
relaxed.
Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So in that fourth jhana chamber or fourth jhana state, I'll use as a word for the time being, but the interface between doing and non-doing is no longer there. There's no more doing. There's just a non-doing state.
Perhaps an easy way to understand it is that the higher jhanas, especially the fourth jhana, its whole point is to look at perception, to look at that namarupa process, to look at how the mind constructs the crap
Yes.
that it comes up with, that we call ideas and opinions. Okay, how does the mind do that? That's what we do in the fourth jhana. Is we start looking at the relationship between the consciousness of the sights and sound versus us manufacturing
Yes.
an opinion about it.
Yeah, yeah. Which is
Okay?
really because there's no opinion, there's no doing, and because there's no doing, that is equanimity. So
Exactly, exactly. That's the whole point, is that we bring to a stop that perceptual process, which brings a stop to the feelings. This is all described in Sutta number 111, by the way. One
111
by
in
one
the
is in the Majjhima
Majjhima
Nikaya.
Nikaya. Yeah, yeah.
One by one as they occur, and that when we get down to really understanding what perception really is, which is nothing but a process, sometimes it happens in one or two mind moments, and sometimes we get stuck in it and it just, and we call that worry.
Mm.
We get worried. What is worry? That means that we keep coming back to the same stuff and being dissatisfied with it and not being able to make anything out of it. And so we just do it again and do it again. We sometimes do that by writing some email over and over and over again that we never mail.
Mm. Yeah, I've been there many times.
Okay, so that's when we get stuck in that loop of perception and we just
Mm.
perceive and perceive and perceive and perceive. But the feelings never go anywhere enough to where we'll say, oh, that's it. I am moved into action, and here is the result, the email that I wrote.
Mm.
Okay, we don't come up to that level of actually acting. We
Mm.
just stay at that level of perception. Okay, we don't kick feelings into gear. And the kicking, by the way, is the pasa. If we're not contacted enough, we're not satisfied enough, that we stay in a state of doubt,
Mm.
confusion.
Mm.
So that kind of gets into that loop of perception, and it's really good when we can catch ourselves doing that.
Mm.
That's what happens.
Mm. And that breaks the chain. It breaks the chain immediately.
Exactly, it does. Aha! And then that joy comes up. I see that. All
Mm.
right. So in that regard, we have to have the samatha to get peaceful enough so that we can really look at how the mind works in order to have
Yes.
those insights.
Yes.
And that's why dry meditation, dry insight doesn't work. It's not a viable practice.
There has to be wet in there. If there's no wet, then it's just going to be constantly trudging around in the dukkha. Almost like dukkha is the only thing that helped me understand this, and I have to wrap myself up in it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. 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 Yeah.
So
You've got other things.
yeah, this teaching of the Buddha on Paticca Samuppada is really, really valuable for us
Mm.
to understand actually how the mind works, so that we can begin to make some changes down at the deeper level, the
Mm.
level of, from knowledge rather than the level from information. But right now,
Yes.
beginners, when I talk to them, they're practicing through the level of information, and we
Mm.
want to give them the success so
Mm.
that they can start working from the knowledge of success. And
Mm.
then they get that deeper knowledge,
Yeah.
which would then be that rich level.
Yeah.
So,
And there at the understanding clearly the Paticca there be a forgetting of it as well, forgetting again and again and again. So as much as one might say, oh, yeah, that's all I need to do now, it's not so much that. It's a moment. There's a moment, a moment, a moment, a moment. And
mhm.
there's also a falling out of that moment. Because I
But
guess, you can't operate in society with that clarity of mind. You have to have some sense of a dualistic separation between me and the lorry in order to make the decision to jump out of the way.
actually, that happens for quite a while. Eventually, there's some modifications later. Okay. Eventually, in fact, the way that we could say the wisest way to go is that we don't get ourselves into trouble anymore. We can
Mm-hmm.
avoid trouble by not
Yeah,
going anywhere near it. In
yeah,
other words, the best way to not get hit by an arrow is don't go out on that sport field.
mm, yeah,
Mm. All right.
yeah,
So if that's the way that we're doing it, then that means that we don't go into society much. We kind of
yeah,
stay away from it,
yeah, yeah.
especially
No, I hear you.
the heavier stuff like dealing with the police or dealing with the politicians,
Yeah,
dealing with the tax people. No, you want to kind of avoid all of those kind of folks.
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally. Yeah, I feel much more at home away from all of that for sure.
Hmm. Well, Andy, I've got another call coming up pretty soon, the Sunday afternoon call. So let's go ahead and finish this. I think that we've gotten a pretty good handle on Salayatana,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really enjoyed talking
our,
to you,
our, our
Dhammarato.
own our own internal television.
Most definitely. Thank you so much for your time, as ever, my friend.
Okay, we'll see you.
All the best.